What's up, and welcome to the Unwatchables. This is a show where we talk movies, and today we are going to be talking about Pet Sematary. My name is Kylie, and I'm joined by Marcus.
Hey, how's it going, everybody?
All right, so let's talk about Pet Sematary. So, a little synopsis to give you some background. The Creed family has just moved into a new house in the countryside, and everything is perfect. It's going great, except for two things. There is semi-trailers that roar past on the narrow road right in front of their house, and there's a mysterious cemetery in the woods behind the house that they unknowingly purchased. And the neighbors are very reluctant to talk about the cemetery, and for good reason, too.
All right, well, I guess that's a pretty good synopsis. Basically, so Pet Sematary, obviously, the story about, burying dead animals and dead people in a cemetery that brings them back to life. I'll say for myself for this film, I never really watched the entirety of the original. I think I watched like half of the original one, like at some like kind of like horror nights things at the Griffith Park Observatory like 5 years ago. And that was my only interactions with it. And I remember the guy that played the dad on the Munsters was in it in the original, but I don't remember much about it. So for this film for myself, I kind of went into it pretty fresh. And I guess I got some thoughts. Well, I guess for Kylie, for yourself, like obviously because this is the Unwatchables and we kind of talk about movies that aren't great. What were your opinions about the movie?
I mean, I liked it. I just think that it had a little bit of wasted potential. And I think that, I'm not totally sure because I've never read the book, but I think that they might have just been staying true to the story rather than taking a little bit more interesting routes than they could have. But I liked it. I just wish that there was a little bit more, I guess. What about you?
Wait, when you say more, like, what do you mean by that?
Well, so, the trailer is really good, made it look super intriguing, and then you go and see the movie, and there's really not anything else. The trailer kind of shows you the entire movie. Besides, maybe explicitly showing the daughter coming back from the dead, but you already knew that was going to happen. So I just felt like either they should have trimmed down the trailer, because one of the first trailers that they released was only like 30 seconds long, and it just had a couple short clips, and they were super intriguing. There were these kids in the masks and whatever, and you didn't really know the story behind the cemetery, and I would have liked to go into the movie that fresh, not knowing what the cemetery was about, because they wasted a lot of the movie explaining what the cemetery was, and I just think that was some wasted time that could have had a little bit better plot to it.
No, I agree with that, definitely. You talked about this before we started recording, the idea for Pet Sematary that they revealed too much in their later advertisements and trailers. I totally agree with that. Basically, if you watch the trailer for this movie, you've essentially watched the entire movie. But since we already touched on that, I guess some of the issues that I have with the movie is I felt like the look, like it had a weird look to it. Like it costs, I forgot exactly what the budget was, but the film wasn't necessarily made on a shoestring budget. Like, it's released by Paramount. It has Jason Clarke, who I guess in the ranking of actors is maybe like a B-list actor. Like, he's definitely on the uptick, but he's not an A-lister, but he's not.
He's like a B+.
Yeah, he's in a lot of films, but not oftentimes a star. But so you have him, you have John Lithgow, and I like both of those actors quite a bit. But yeah, I just feel like the whole movie took place in two houses. Like two houses in the outskirts of Georgia, probably where they filmed it, I imagine, or somewhere in the South. And yeah, it just felt really small. And like the cinematography and everything for it, it almost made it feel like a Lifetime movie, but with horror elements almost. Because like the whole thing was in his house, John Lithgow's house, in a terrible green screen where the actual animals were buried. And there's the one scene where there's like that big like wall made of like sticks and stuff that like stops you from going further in Pet Sematary. But they only filmed, I feel like there's only like 3 scenes in the entire movie where they even go to that.
Yeah, there weren't that many locations. I guess you also have, does he work at a school? Is that where he is?
I think he's the doctor at like a university, yeah, something like that.
So I guess there's a few short scenes there. And by the two houses, are you talking about
like John Lithgow's house and the main family's house?
Okay, yeah, because there's also a brief time where they're at what's his wife's name? They're at her parents' house, but it's all really brief, and yeah, there's just a lot of wasted time in their house, in the Creed house. I would agree with that.
Do did you think that like, I mean, I'm not really that big of a fan of horror films. Do you feel like, was this movie like not scary enough? Like, was it kind of in a weird middle ground between being like scarier than a family drama, but not necessarily scary enough to be like a contemporary horror film?
It's hard to say. I think that for contemporary horror, you have to have a lot of suspense because people are pretty numb to gore and whatnot. And I think that, I mean, this film was suspenseful, but not the best, you know. I think that it was definitely disturbing, the elements and like what was involved, bringing things back from the dead, bringing people back from the dead. And the one scene that did get me, that did scare me, was when that college kid got hit by the truck and he died on the table, and they just showed
like
that
his body is.
yeah, it was super graphic and you could see his brain and stuff, and that got to me. But for whatever reason, the rest of the movie wasn't that gory at all, and it wasn't as scary. That was one of the scariest scenes to me.
I mean, the scene where the daughter, who I guess in the original film was a boy, like in the film, in the part of in this one at least, when she cuts the Achilles tendon, I guess, of John Lithgow, that was pretty graphic.
Yeah.
But the whole film went like large portions where not really a lot was happening. And I thought with a little girl too, I mean, like I said, since I didn't watch the original, I didn't really care that she was a girl versus a boy. I mean, maybe for people that really read the books, they would care about that. I feel like though for her, yeah, I thought she was fine for, you know, the first 2/3 of the film. But once she got dead or became dead, a living dead, I just feel like it was ridiculous watching her do stuff. Like when she fights Jason Clarke in the cemetery, like that was like, oh, come on. This is like a little girl. I just feel like when you watch little kids, or like, that's one reason why I've never really liked Chucky, is that it just like visually looks ridiculous when you see someone really small, like a child or a toy, like killing adults.
Yeah.
Like I think it's laughable.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't want to hark on her acting too much because she is young, but it was a little bit cheesy. I think she could have delivered it a little bit more seriously. But I mean, you can't really blame her. She's probably like 8 or 9 or something, you know.
I mean, that's probably true. I mean, I guess, yeah, you can't really like.
Yeah, you're not wrong, but you know, she is young.
I mean, one thing I will say too is like, when Jason Clarke is like sleeping in the bed next to her, like they're both sharing that bed. Like I just remember thinking to myself, like, gosh, like I would never do that. Like
So
I would be
scary.
so afraid of getting murdered in my sleep.
Yeah, but I mean, she had just come back, and I mean, he knew that the cat was acting weird, but I don't think that he thought that his daughter would be the same way. I think because she's a human, he figured that she would retain humanity, you know, in a way. But, you know, he's also not very familiar with this, and he just wanted his daughter back. I mean, and I mean, obviously, neither of us could imagine what it's like to lose a child. And
I also feel like one thing I just feel like I also didn't like about the plot, how they conveyed it, is so everybody knows that she died. The wife knew, all the friends, everybody knew that this little girl died. Like, and Jason Clarke's the doctor. I mean, what did he think people were gonna say? It's like, oh yeah, here's here she is, everybody. Like, she's alive now. Like, we know that we buried her in the ground, but now she's alive. Like, I feel like in the movie, like Jason Clarke basically just like on a whim was like, oh, I'm gonna dig her up and do this. So then like with no thinking about it at all. Like for a guy that's a medical doctor, like this atheistic medical doctor that's like really rational and like logical, that was such a hair-brained idea. It's so half-baked. Like, what were people gonna say? Like, it's ridiculous.
yeah, one thing I didn't understand, I understand that they had to do this purely just for the plot, but if a tiny little girl is hit by a giant semi-truck, I mean, her head would like explode. Like, she wouldn't still have a face, you know what I mean?
Yeah, her whole body would.
Yeah.
She gets splattered.
She got thrown, I guess, but even so, you know, like she had the staples in the back of her head and her face was kind of drooping, but that was the extent of it. I just feel like because she was also facing the truck when it was coming to her, there was a shot of her looking and realizing what was happening, and yet the injury was on the back of her head, which was just a continuity thing that kind of bothered me. But
yeah, unless they were saying that her head hit the ground and her brains came out after it or something.
So then she would have gotten hit in the face and her face would have been messed up.
Oh yeah, her body looked way too.
Yeah, it was
way
too complete.
good.
Yeah.
I just feel like, I mean, I think with this movie again, like I thought the whole first 2/3 of it, the first 2 acts, or whatever, I felt like I was kind of getting into it. It just feel like at the end, when everything actually started happening, it kind of fell apart. But before that, I kind of liked it. I just feel like the third part is where everything. The third act is just when the whole movie just kind of, in my opinion, kind of fell apart a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's because the build up of suspense is what's most enjoyable. You know, not the scare, at least to me. And so when you spend 2/3 of a movie just building up, you know, you have to have a really big payoff. And so I think it was just really hard to follow that build up because I just feel like they kind of dug themselves into a hole with that one.
Yeah, they did. I also think too, I mean, well, I guess we could probably get to this a little bit later, but you know, in the advertisements too, they really promote this idea of these kids wearing these masks, like the animal mask. And in the film, I only remember one scene of that.
There was only one. I thought that
they're doing like that little funeral percussion for their dead animal or whatever. And yeah, it's like in the trailer. I feel like there was a scene in the trailer where the little girl is wearing an animal mask and is trying to kill her mom. I thought that was in a trailer that I saw.
I'm not sure. I know that in the movie, at least, there the dad, Jason Clarke's character, finds an animal mask in the basement or something, and then that's when he first sees her again when she comes back to life. I can't remember if she was holding it or not, but he found it on the bed, and that was the only other time in the movie where that showed up. But I thought that was really creepy and cool and kind of artistic, and I wish that had been in the movie a little bit more too.
Yeah, it's kind of like they just dropped it.
Yeah.
I also feel like one more thing I guess I want to gripe on is, did the movie look modern to you?
I think that it was supposed to look a little bit older, at least in like the way that it was lit. Is that what you're talking about? Like the style?
Well, I just feel like the way that it was shot and the CG was so terrible. Like it almost looks like this movie could have been filmed like 4 or 5 years ago, and they shelved it and just released it. Like I know that's not what happened, but it almost feels like that is kind of what happened.
I think that was intentional because if you think about it, I mean, the special effects are pretty good, but it's still, I mean, it's set in the 80s and whatever, but, you know, it still looks kind of older the way that it's shot and stuff, and the special effects, the blood coming out of the sink, it looks pretty fake. I think it's sort of a stylistic thing. I don't know if it's like a Stephen King sort of thing, but I think it's supposed to look a little bit older. I don't really mind it because I think that it was intentional, so that's just sort of the style that the director chose. But
yeah, but I kind of hate that look. I personally don't really. I think it could have looked better overall as a movie. But you might be right. That might be hey, we're making a Stephen King movie. We're making a movie based on a Stephen King novel, so it has to be this or that.
Yeah, because it reminded me of It a lot. It's just a little bit darker, not super great special effects, but I mean, I still think it looks good. I mean, the green screen, yeah, I didn't like that with the
when they were actually at the
cemetery.
Yeah, at the peak of the mountain. Kind of also that scene a little bit reminded me of Infinity War.
Oh,
like when they're walking up the stairs, like remember in Infinity War when they're walking up the stairs with Red Skull, like Gamora and Thanos.
And Thanos, yeah,
Red Skull's like in that. Like it kind of reminded me of that, like how the steps went and how it looked at the top. Obviously, Infinity War looked a lot better, but
yeah.
I also feel like too for this movie, so I looked into it. Like Paramount, I guess, wanted to make this film back in 2010, and have kind of wanted to do it for a while. I think that if It the Clown hadn't been so successful, I wouldn't be shocked if Pet Sematary would have come out either later or never. I think the fact that It the Clown made so much money, I think Paramount thought that they could like capitalize off that somewhat.
Yeah, I think that they'll probably continue to do Stephen King movies. At least that's my prediction.
Well, I mean, they have It the Clown 2's coming out this year, and I've heard talks about like them wanting to do like a sequel to The Shining, or there was a sequel written.
Oh.
Yeah, Stephen King wrote a sequel, I believe, and I think that there's talks about making that.
I'd like to see a remake, I think, of The Shining. Because I like the old movie, but it just has really slow pacing. I think that it could be done a little bit better today.
Well, The Shining is almost like 40 years old. So
Yeah,
I can understand what you're saying. Like, it kind of has that 70s vibe to it. Like, a lot of films that came out in the 70s and even, like, early 80s, they kind of have that vibe. And The Shining definitely has that vibe.
Like the slow pacing?
Yeah, slow pacing, really wide shots.
Yeah.
It just kind of looks like a very old movie.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I think it looks very old, but
Yeah.
I like it, but it looks old.
I mean, I feel like for the effects in that movie, it was ahead of its time. I mean, I think it's a good movie, but I'd like to see what they do with it now.
I guess I have to see who they'd cast. Hopefully, well, if they did a remake, I don't even know who they could get.
I don't know. Those are some really big shoes to fill. All right. Well, should we move on to our?
Yeah. So I guess we can move on to what we would have changed. So obviously, I mean, everybody can just have their own thoughts, but these are, I guess, are just our opinions about what we think could have been done to make the movie a little bit better. So I guess I'll start with one. I think it would have been better had it been scarier.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I feel like it was in that middle ground between, like, there was scary parts, but it wasn't like a contemporary horror film in the sense of, like, oh my gosh, like, I'm at the edge of my seat, like, there's jump scares, like, I'm freaking out. Like, this movie really didn't really have a lot of that, but it was also too scary just to be a normal drama or suspense film.
Yeah, was it I don't know how they classified it actually, but is it supposed to be horror or is it supposed to be a thriller?
I believe it's horror. Like,
Okay,
if you look it
that's
up,
what
it's
I thought.
horror. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, something that I wish they'd done a little bit differently is I wish that they hadn't heavily followed the Jason Clarke's character because he seemed to be the main character in this movie, but I just feel like his story and his background was not as interesting as like his wife. His wife had all these like past trauma and all that creepy stuff that happened with her sister and her sister dying, and she just had a lot more depth to her character, I feel like. And maybe if we followed the mom, and I guess it would have been a total like gender swap of the original movie, but I don't think that would have hindered it. I think that would have been kind of cool.
Yeah, I looked up, so it is classified as a horror, but yeah, you're right. Like, for Jason Clarke's character, like, I mean, I guess the whole idea for him and the whole arc, and probably what Stephen King was thinking, is we're gonna take this guy that's very scientific and very rational, and then like introduce the supernatural into his life, so that way he's confronted with his worldview. That's probably what Stephen King was thinking from like a thematic standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
But you're right, like, from a practical film that's a horror film, the mother being haunted by the ghost of her dead sister is far more compelling.
Yeah.
Like, Jason Clarke, for all we know, his character, at least in this rendition of the film, like, his life is fine. Like, his background life, I mean, we don't know anything about any kind of past traumatic incidences, really.
Yeah, and so it just kind of undermines her whole past, and it makes you wonder why it was even included in the film. It didn't really do much except for give her bad dreams and add some scarier scenes. I don't really know exactly what it added to the overall movie. I don't know if you could.
No, I agree with you. I think that, like, when you see her dead sister, and I mean, like, you raised this point again before we started recording, that, when you see the dead sister and the premonitions and the visions of the past of her, like, it almost gives you the inclination that the film is like or the house is haunted in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
But in reality, it's just the Pet Sematary part is the haunted part. So her seeing her dead sister and all these visions, like, first off, like you said, I don't really know what practical purpose it serves. And also be like, what on earth does the dead sister have to do with this? I mean, it'd be one thing if they mentioned the dead sister and then the daughter brought it up when she kills her mom. Mm-hmm. And she did, I think, when she's like stabbing her in the side. She's like,
yeah,
you didn't do this for blah, blah, blah. But like, yeah, the mom's just droning on and on about the dead sister and having these thoughts. And it's like, and too, it's like, I mean, again, when Stephen King wrote the book, I'm sure he probably wrote it. It was released in the 80s because the first film was released in the 80s. So it's probably their late 70s or early 80s the book was released. Like, there's things that practically, when that book was written, that I think they made more sense at that time than now. Like, so for example, the daughter being upstairs, or the main girl's sister, or sorry, the wife's sister in the past when she has the vision, like when she's getting fed when the tray goes upstairs.
Oh, the dumbwaiter.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, that's not very contemporary. Why not put the girl downstairs?
Yeah.
And also, too, what kind of ambiguous disease is that where it just makes her look like a grotesque monster that can't move?
I'm not sure. I mean, I guess she had a really, really bad scoliosis because all they ever said was that she had a really bad twisted spine.
Yeah.
Right? So I don't know. I mean, I guess she looked gross because she was always in bed and had like bed sores and stuff like that. But they made her look like a monster.
Yeah, she didn't look like a real human. She didn't look like she had a real human ailment.
Oh, although It might just be dramatized because it's showing it from her perspective when she was a child. So that does kind of make sense that she would look more monstrous, and less human-like.
I mean, I guess,
Because she was scared, when she was little.
yeah, but the film, I don't think they really convey that in the movie exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just a stylistic choice to show her perspective, but it's hard to make sense of it when you're an adult.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's true. Another thing I would definitely change is cut back on the CG. Like when they're at the top of that mountain, it looked like trash. I thought it looked so stupid.
I know. I always prefer horror movies that use practical effects rather than CG because I feel like you can always point it out. You can always tell.
Well, that looked ridiculous. The sky's purple. There's lightning going on, and it's
the
like
fog. Yeah.
I mean, I think they say the house goes back for maybe like let's say from the peak of this like the mountain in Pet Sematary where you bury things and it comes back to life. From that to Jason Clarke's house is like a mile. Let's say at the most. There's no way he owns more than a mile of land, right?
Yeah.
If there's lightning going on up there and the sky's purple up there, wouldn't it be purple and lightning down at their house?
Yeah.
Jason Clarke and his family and John Lithgow's house.
I know. Practically, it doesn't make sense. I think it's just supposed to look like
ominous and spooky.
An ominous, creepy place, but yeah, for continuity purposes, it doesn't make sense.
I mean, it should have just been there at the top of like some mountain or a hill, and it's just like that. Like,
yeah, I
feel
think
like that would have looked better.
To me, it would have been scarier if it was just a regular place that was really dark and like in the forest, because that's realistic and that's a place that could actually exist.
Yeah, maybe you just added like some fog, like some spooky fog, like how you have like a lot of films in the 30s and 40s, like. Just added some fog because you could believe that a big mountain would have fog up there.
Yeah, I think it's scarier when things are more realistic because then it's something that could actually happen to you.
I mean, the CG looked like there's about as much CG in that scene as there was in Infinity War. Infinity War, though, it's like, oh, you're on a distant planet. They can do whatever they want to. That this is Earth and like
in a forest.
Yeah, in a forest that's a mile away from where people live.
Yeah. I mean, I think we're kind of harping on a lot of the artistic choices, which... it's all very opinion based, but I think that they're valid.
Yeah. I think another thing I definitely would have also changed is like I would have liked them to like play up the atmosphere more, make it more creepy, like just the whole ambiance. Like a lot of old films, at least a lot of old horror films that I personally very much like, they have an ambiance and there's like a feel, like it's like environmental factors that kind of make it creepier. I feel like with this, it just kind of felt like. If you've been to the South, if you've been to the South or like parts of the country where there's not like a ton of people, it just kind of felt like that. Like here's a road, here's people with big yards, and that's it, kind of,
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that to me isn't really that like creepy or anything. Like I feel like they could have played it up and made it a little bit more creepy and had more scenes of like spooky, like people walking around town or spooky like. General store. It just kind of felt like people were living like outside of Georgia or South Carolina and they're 2 hours away from a big city.
Yeah, it was very rural. And also I think that I don't feel like the house itself was super creepy either. I think that they could have played that up a little bit more too, like made it dirtier, a little bit darker. I don't know.
Are you glad that they don't kill the little baby at the end, like actually show it?
But it's so implied,
Oh, yeah,
I think it's equally upsetting, even if they didn't show it, I don't really think it matters. It's just sad either way.
Yeah, I don't really know about this whole trend about killing babies like on screen, like they did that in Fantastic Beasts 2. Like Johnny Depp kills a baby.
They did. Well, it wasn't on screen.
Yeah, it wasn't on screen, but just like this, it wasn't
Yeah.
on screen, but it's like, hey, you're killing the babies?
Well, okay, like I said earlier, people are getting so numb to gore and everything. Now they're gonna start killing babies, I guess.
I just feel like that's a little bit like overkill, in my opinion. Like,
oh, definitely.
Yeah,
definitely. But I don't know. I guess now they're just doing what they have to do to shock their audiences.
I guess so. I also, I think it was hard for that little baby to like remain calm when they were filming the scene, because I kind of was laughing when the three of them are like walking up, but like I think this baby was probably a little fussy and stuff, so that's probably the best take they had, but it still kind of looked a little like
Yeah, well, I mean, he didn't. I mean, if you're a baby, you don't know what's going on. You know, you see your family, and maybe they're a little bit dirty looking, but if you're a baby, you don't know that they're evil. You don't know that they're about to kill you.
No, that baby's
You
being
know?
whored out by his parents. I mean, he doesn't even want to be there. They're forcing him to work
I
in
just,
that
I just meant
scene
in the
too.
movie.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I just meant in real life. That baby,
Okay.
he doesn't want to be there.
Yeah.
He's not
I
even
guess
gonna
so.
get that cash.
That's true.
Anyways, I guess what grade do you give the movie?
I would say that it's a one-timer. Honestly, I might watch it again. I really like Stephen King. I loved it. But you know, it wasn't great. I think there was some wasted potential, but yeah, so I'll just say one-timer.
Yeah, I'll also say one timer. Like I said, like I like Jason Clarke, I like John Lithgow. Like I think they're both good actors. I think the movie overall was fine. Definitely nothing special. I don't really care that much about Stephen King. Really, I thought It the Clown was okay. So I guess from that standpoint, I thought it was okay. I mean, there's definitely better horror films, but there's also worse ones. So it's to me, it's like right in the center. Like I wouldn't tell people to pay money to see in theaters though, for sure. I would say
Yeah.
you should wait till Netflix or whatever, or Hulu or Amazon has it.
That's true. Although I don't know, even you know, just the few scenes that are actually scary, they might be more worth it to see it in theaters because they might not hit the same at home. You know, I have that problem with horror movies, so
No, that's
yeah.
true. Oftentimes horror films are really a lot. They're a lot more lackluster at home or just like on a small screen or
Yeah.
your computer or phone even.
Especially with it, there was that one scene. Did you see it?
Yeah.
There was that one scene where he came out of the projector and he was just huge and in the garage. In theaters, that hit like crazy. That was so terrifying. But then at home, you watch it on a smaller screen and like, you know, he's not that big. And
Oh yeah.
but I'm getting off topic.
All right. Well, definitely thank you guys for listening. Make sure to check out the rest of our content. We do a lot of movie review stuff. We have interviews. We have the Domcast. We have some other shows coming up. So definitely thank you for listening and check us out on iTunes and Spotify as well.
All right, we'll catch you next week.